All right, welcome back everybody. I'm Kalani, this is World Drum Club. In this lesson, we're gonna be looking at soloing and soloing ideas. This came from a question from a fan of the channel, Brian, so I wanna say thanks for that. So in this video, I'm gonna be covering an approach to soloing, and that's a big topic. I wanna tell you what I'm gonna cover, what I'm not gonna cover right off the bat. So what I'm gonna cover is how to get started soloing over whatever music. This is non-genre specific. I'll talk about that in a second. We're going to look at things like developing a theme that is appropriate for the background. So we're going to look at context. We'll look at how to produce variations on that theme. I think that's a big part to producing continuity, and it also gives you ways of producing more ideas. So if you're asking yourself, what do I play? That would answer that question. We're going to look at how to create an interesting solo, in my opinion, by using things like tension and release, right? What kinds of things can you do to produce that tension and release that really is at the core of what makes music or anything interesting, all right? It's that movement. And then we're going to look at phrasing, both in the short term and over the longer term, like what we could call form, so that when you are forming your ideas, you're keeping form in mind. And what does that mean? It's kind of like the arc of the entire thing, right? And also the smaller arcs, the phrases that make up the entire thing. But it's also about planning, So we'll look at that. And then towards the end, I'll just briefly talk about genre or style and some other considerations that relate to that. And I'll put in a few other things along the way. So if those are of interest to you, if this is an interesting topic to you and you want to learn more, keep watching, all right? Let's get started. And first thing I want to talk about is the background. When we start to solo, the first thing we have to do, right, is listen. Don't just start playing, listen. So in this case, I've got this, and I'll tell you what it's called. So this is just in my looper, and they're calling this Latin percussion, world. So this is a kind of a typical background. It's got a cowbell that I can hear. It's got bongos. It's got congas, which is going to be a little redundant. And that's basically it. So I've got a couple drums and a cowbell. All right. Now, that's a lot going on, right? That's a lot there. So I want to contrast that with something else. Let's go to, I'm going to find something else real quick, and I'll bring you in on this process. I'm going to hit play. I'm just going to find another beat. All right, here's one they're calling merengue. Kind of different. Same bongo sort of vibe, but no congas. Actually, there is a conga. It's in the background. And then there's this bass drum, right, that we had going 4 on the floor. We've also got a little bit of hi-hat in there. Yeah, a little cymbal. Let's do one more. This is they're calling bossa nova. And this has got a different feel, right? Kind of a halftime feel. There's a little clave click. There's a hi-hat. A bass drum. All right, and then a conga again. All right, so let's go back. We're gonna go back to this Latin percussion. All right, so the idea is, let's just talk about background for a second. What is happening in the music that you are going to then solo over, all right? You have to think about that. You have to listen so that you can make an informed choice about what you play. And in this case, I want to take the idea. So here's your first idea, second idea actually. First one is listen to the background. Second idea is, what can I add to it that's going to be different or make it more interesting? In this case, there's already a lot going on. So I would say that if the background is pretty busy, if you're already playing with a few other elements, let's call them players, if you're already playing with a few other musicians or players, then depending on the density of the music, you might want to take a more sparse approach, because the fact is there's already a lot going on. You don't need to replicate anything that's happening, right? There's already things happening on a lot of notes. So let's hear what that would sound like. Put this on, and I'm going to play more sparse. Now, let's talk about concepts. So I want to talk now about the next section, which will be theme, but within the concept of matching, right? I want to match the music, meaning I want to play something that fits with the music, right? So I've got to consider not necessarily genre. We're just talking about whatever you think fits, right? So we'll talk about genre and styles later. That's kind of it's a related topic to matching, but it's a different topic. What I'm talking about right now is just listening to things like the volume, the note density, which we just talked about, how many things are going on, what's going on, and then what are the musical elements that you're hearing. In this example, we've got what we could call a 4/4 or duple meter rhythm. We've got a tempo, right? This happens to be, let's see, 100 BPM, 100 beats per minute. These are the parameters within which we're going to solo. So we're intellectualizing it. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you intellectualize it like this. Oh, what's the BPM? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying listen, take it all into context, and then figure out what's going to match that, right? And when we say match, we just mean that it's complementary and it goes together. And that is different than playing in a certain style. So in this case, I'm playing a solo, so I need to, have an appropriate volume level. I'm going to use sounds that I think blend with the overall music. Obviously, in percussion soloing and things, this is kind of a given already. It's sort of done for us. But if we were playing maybe a different instrument or in a different style, we might need to modify what we're doing to fit that, to fit the sound. So I'm just talking about making whatever you're doing kind of fit in with the music. All right, themes. This is super important. So after we listen, and we gather, we get familiar with the landscape, right? It's kind of like you're going to go explore, but you've really got to check out where are you going. You don't want to step off a cliff right away, right? So where is the terrain? What are the options I have? Let's say we want to head out this way. I see a little trail, and there's a little hill. I don't know what's on the other side of the hill, but I'm going to head that way. The way I could get there is through thematic development. And right now, for the purposes of this video, we're just going to assume that the background is going to be consistent. If it changes, then of course, then you're going to change, right? You can readjust. But for right now, we're just going to look at a consistent background. All right, themes. What is a theme? A theme is a musical idea. Bum, 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 right? They can be really short. They can be 2 or 3 notes. In fact, I want to pick one. I was thinking about it, and one came to mind earlier when I was planning this video, and I thought, I'm just going to pick a 3-note theme. I'll play it for you right now. It's just a like a pop, pop, boom, like 2 highs and a low, something like that. But 3 notes, all right? Then I'm going to repeat and exploit that theme and create variations. I'm going to create variations in phrasing, in the note value, or the tempo, the relationship to the tempo. So it'll sound more compressed, or it would sound more expanded. All right, we call that diminution and augmentation. But let's just use we can use the words compressing it or expanding it. All right, here's an example. Here we go. was a lot of the same thing, but I just wanted to make the point that you can just take one idea and then you're just going to work it. All right. And now let's look at some of the things that I did to create what I think of as tension and release. And by the way, I'm not claiming that everything I'm playing right now is the most musical, amazing solo, because I think that's too much pressure. I'm trying to demonstrate some ideas that you can use, when it's your turn to solo. So please forgive me if anything I play is a little clumsy or maybe not the most musical. I'm doing my best, all right? So tension, what is tension? Tension is created when two things move in what we could think of as opposite directions, all right? This is tension, and this is continuity, obviously. So when forces come together, we've got tension. When forces move in the same direction or similar direction, we've got harmony or continuity. Both are important for music because what makes music interesting, not exclusively, but a lot of the time, is a pattern of tension and release. That's why we have chords that create tension and then they resolve to chords that create harmony. We've got rhythms that create tension and rhythms that resolve into harmony or lack of tension. How do we do that? One of the main ways let's start with harmony. Of course, one of the main ways that we create harmony is to play with something. Okay, it works. It's not the most interesting. So how do we create tension and interest? We go against that. We put something else there that doesn't feel like it's trying to fit. It creates what's the word? Well, it creates tension. Because you could use a lot of words like rubbing up against it, creating friction. So how do we do that musically? One of the ways we do that is through syncopation, which is playing offbeat notes, right? These are notes that are kind of in the cracks of the rhythm, if you will, the in-between notes. Okay, all of those were still pretty much in the same 4/4, duple meter rhythm, but more interesting, right? Because they're syncopated, they're off the beat, off the main beat. That's a great way to start. You hear a lot of solos might start that way. Sparse, but syncopated. All right, another thing we do is we might imply a different metric figure, like a duple, like a triplet figure over a duple, right? Triplets are just any set of 3 notes that take up the space of what would usually be 2 notes or 4 notes. So here's some examples of triplets or duple figures. Duple, right? Triplets. Our theme, all right? All right, we're mixing it up. I think you get the idea, all right? So another kind of meter. And that, when we balance that, when we move back and forth between anything that's syncopated or in a different kind of metric relationship to the primary, music, then we are creating tension. And we move back and forth to create tension and release. So let me attempt to give you an example of that right now. So I'm going to move back and forth. I'll try to produce tension, and then I will just try to release it by landing, back on the downbeat or just playing some other kind of little phrase that sort of says, okay, I'm done with this. This is wrapping up, and now it's like a refresh. Now we clean the slate. So we draw something, we erase it. We draw something, we erase it, kind of thing. Sparse. All right, those are a few examples. I think you could hear that I was setting up something that was kind of going against the grain, and then I would release it back, catch and release. All right, that's not a bad metaphor, actually, or analogy. All right, let's talk a little bit about form and phrasing. I think we're covering all the things pretty well, you guys. And by the way, if you appreciate this video, please support us at patreon.com/Kalani. We are a community-supported channel. So if you are by chance watching this for free or as a non-paying supporter or patron, please consider joining. That's how we support this channel, all right? We appreciate it. All right, let's look at form and phrasing. So phrasing is what I just did some of, right? I created some themes, and I used the themes to create tension and release phrases, and then I'm going to string together phrases, all right? Now, I just kind of did that, so I want to bring your attention to now the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is a solo is made up of phrases, right? Which are made up of themes and variations and all that stuff. But now we're looking at the phrase and another phrase and another phrase, and we want to build the story. We want to kind of tell a story. These are characters, like all these little rhythms. That's my main character in my story. Things will happen, all right? You develop, you make friends, meets friends, he meets, or, buddies. So let's just stick with that analogy for a minute. You have a main character, you have other characters. They have little things that happen. But what makes a good story, right, is it builds. They have challenges. And then they have moments of, okay, we got past that. Oh, but now there's a bigger challenge. And about, and I don't want to give an exact number, but you guys know, like it's got to culminate, right? You want it to culminate. You don't want the most exciting stuff to happen at the beginning, and then it just goes downhill from there. Like that would be a horrible movie, right? Or a horrible book. You want it to build over time so that when your solo time is wrapping up, you've got everything at the height. You've built this thing up to the height of your solo. Now, sometimes you're going to be the one who says, okay, this is the end of the solo, and you might play a break or a cue. You might nod your head and say, okay, let's go back, into the chorus or the tune, whatever, or to another solo. Sometimes you have a set number of bars, so we don't know what your situation is going to be, but I'm just saying sometimes you've got a set, 32 bars or 16 bar solo. Sometimes you can solo as long as you feel, and then you're just going to say, okay, I'm done somehow. Usually with a nod or a cue or something, or you play a figure. All right, but that's beside the point. The point now is we're going to build. So I'm going to try to do that with you guys, even though this background is pretty static. And at this point, I want to change the background because I've been working with this one for a while. Let's change it to something else. just so we have more than one example of how I might relate to a given background. All right, so now let's go to one of the other ones I played for you earlier. And I also want to, I'm going to decrease the tempo a little. Oh, hold on. Now I'll decrease the tempo. All right. So now we're at 88, a little slower. So I'm going to try to play some phrases. I'm still going to use my main kind of theme idea. And we'll see what happens. But I'm going to try to build over, a few phrases. Here we go. Honestly, I wasn't impressed with myself just now, but I tried to build something over time. How did I do that? I used these ideas that we've been talking about of theme development, of syncopation, of turning a duple into a triple, of phrasing and tension and release, and then overall kind of building, the complexity and the tension and the energy over time. And I think I generally did that. Whether it was, super artistic or not is a question that we could debate. It wasn't. But I think you get the idea, right? So hopefully that's helpful for you. I mean, you're going to ultimately, you're going to play how you play with the tools that you have. And you're not going to sound like somebody else who's done, a different path, who's walked a different path than you. But let me go into a couple things now that I think we can wrap up with. I'll give you even more ideas to take into your own practice. And that is one, and you'll hear this, people talking about this, is this idea of what we call licks, right? Or figures. And a lick or a figure, and this relates to genre, is it's sort of a codified rhythmic phrase, right? And I've used some so far today in this video. For example, I want to go to a different rhythm and speed back up a little bit. This one, this one, all right, that's a pretty common phrase that you might hear. There's a lot, right? There's a lot of little phrases and licks that as hand percussionists we're going to be exposed to from different genres, different teachers, different players. You can hear them on recordings. You can hear them in shows, live, maybe a lesson, lots of different kinds of licks out there. So while I'm not advocating that you build a solo entirely from licks that you've learned and memorized, they are useful because, again, they're like phrases. I mean, when we talk to each other, we use a lot of the same little phrases or phraselets, statements, you know, little things that we've used, that we always use. That's how we converse. So there's nothing wrong with relying on or using, you know, this idea of a lick or a figure in your soloing. But then you still want to exercise the other concepts I've been talking about, like listening, playing things that are appropriate with the background. In other words, matching the music, phrasing, building over time, creating tension, creating release. You still want to do all those things and look at the overall form so it builds. All right. So whether you're using licks or not, you're still going to do all those other things. Another, you know, and this will be the last kind of musical thing I want to talk about here, is the use of ornaments, not just during the holidays, but ornaments are, let's call them treatments to a larger like figure. So we've got a figure like the one that I first played, right? But I might change that a little bit, like putting in a little flam. That's a flam. The flam is two quick notes together. That would be I'm not changing the main idea, but I'm just using an ornament or in this case, it's a rudiment. That's a drumming rudiment. But I'm going to put it in the ornamentation category. So anything that is a treatment of a figure that doesn't change the fundamental nature of the figure, but that embellishes it. We could also use the word embellishment for these things. So instead of like, we could add a couple notes in there, like we call that a ruff, or some other kind of figure where we're just, instead of playing one note, we might play, right? So those kinds of things, ornaments or embellishments, can also help us not just add variation and richness to our playing in the soloing context, but they can also prompt new ideas. And sometimes we might play something because of the musicality of it, but we also might discover a new idea based on the physicality of it. You know, you go for something, you try to play something, maybe it fits the way you thought it was going to fit, or maybe, and this never happens to me, you guys, I try to play something and it doesn't quite work off the way I thought, but then there's something there different that it's what we call a mistake. We call them unexpected moments. It's unexpected, but that doesn't mean it's always bad, right? So that's another lesson that we have with soloing, is that you can recycle material or recycle ideas that they're not what you expected, but that doesn't mean they're not useful. And it doesn't mean that you can't go with it, you know? So you might discover a new way of playing, a new way of relating to the music, which would be great, right? So be open, and I just want to say, from the psychological aspect of soloing, because it can be kind of scary, you know, to play a solo, put yourself out there, is that it's an exercise in mindfulness. It's an exercise in risk-taking, which is good. We want to take risks. It's an exercise in acceptance, right? So whatever happens, don't beat yourself up, for God's sake, you guys. Just move on, you know, and that is probably one of the best reasons that we should practice soloing and take solos, because it helps us become resilient people, all right? Especially if you happen to be online at all. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's this thing called the internet, and there's this other thing called social media. And the more resilient you are, the better your experience can be. You know, you don't take things so personally, and you can roll with it, all right? So the last thing I want to talk about, and I did mention this when we first started, is I want to talk about genres, right? Genres are, you can think of them as just styles, right? There's a style. Is it Latin? Is it Brazilian? Is it West African? Is it from the Arab countries? Is it Asian? What's the style? All right, that's going to be And I'm not going to teach style, that's not my goal right now. But I just want to acknowledge that there are differences between genres, especially when the genres are very rhythmic focused, like a lot of the music from the African diaspora, music from Arab nations or North Africa. Really, all music is, but there are specific ways that a soloist typically would relate to the music in that style. And so that's another thing that if you're not familiar with that and you're going to play a conga, for example, like I have here, I've been playing a conga drum, and I'm going to play over a quote-unquote Latin or Caribbean style, that I might want to research that music, listen to a lot of that music, go listen to people play, watch videos, take lessons, whatever it is, so that you are familiar with that vocabulary, that dialect, you know, so that when you play, you've got that accent, if that makes sense. Now, do you have to do that? No, you don't have to, but that does exist. It's a matter of whether you want to plug into that dialect and accent so that when you speak on your instrument, you might be able to blend even more and fit the genre as it is typically or traditionally played within, right? So I'm not saying that you need to do that. You must do that. If you play a conga, you've got to, you know, play it like somebody from the Caribbean. That's not what I'm saying. But it is an option for you. And I think it's a good idea, personally. I think you'll learn more. You'll develop as a musician. You'll have more options. And if you get a chance to sit in with a salsa band, then you'll sound like you fit in, all right, with that band. If you go sit in with a Brazilian group, you could fit in with that, or West African, whatever the genre is. So you do want to be aware of the different genres and styles, and all the music from around the world, every region, you know, there's a little different flavor, a little different accent, little differences in, you know, timing and phrasing all over the world. So that's something else that you can tune into, but I know that's like maybe level 3 or 4. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I do want to thank Brian for asking the question. If this has been helpful and you're watching it on YouTube or somewhere, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and join us at patreon.com/Kalani. If you're on Patreon, feel free to leave a question below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you guys next time. Happy practicing.